Met before. I'm Jen. I'm one of the co-founders of Augusta. And what I'm going to be doing with you today is basically talking about the idea of managing up. And if you're not familiar with this concept, I'm going to talk about what it is and share some of the strategies that you can use to help your boss understand your caregiver hiring funnel, which ultimately will help you get more of what you need in your role as a recruiter or HR person at a home care agency. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And if you just joined, this is going to be a relatively interactive session. So I've got a bunch of questions that I'm going to ask you to use the Q&A for, and a poll, and so lots of opportunities to participate and hopefully get a lot out of this experience. It's almost going to be a workshop kind of a format. So let me go on to my next slide here. So that brings me to, there is the Q&A bar. I'm sure you've been on a Zoom recently or something similar, but just pointing it out, there's that Q&A button down at on your Zoom bar at the bottom. If you click on that, you'll be able to type in questions and responses to the questions that I have for you all. And next, we are recording this. So if you have a colleague you want to share it with afterwards, or just want to be able to review it later or send it to somebody else, the recording will be available probably end of the week or maybe early next week. And I will email it out to anybody who registered for this event. So, quick rundown on the agenda today. The first thing I'm going to do is tell you a little bit about Augusta. I promise I'm not going to spend too much time on it because I really do want this session to be educational and for you to get a few takeaways out of it specifically. But to help you understand where the data that I have comes from, it's helpful to understand what we do, at least at a kind of a base level. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Augusta. I'm going to talk about what is managing up and define that so we can have kind of a frame of reference for this conversation. And then I'm going to address why to proactively explain your hiring funnel to your leadership, whether that's the owner of the agency or another manager above you or whoever it may be. Then we're going to talk about what to measure in your hiring funnel. And then finally, how to explain that in a way that will help you set realistic expectations in your job role as the recruiter or HR person. So that's what's on the list today. I did actually note that there was, when folks were registering for this, there's a few people who submitted questions in advance, and I did actually try and bake those into my slides. So hopefully you will get your questions answered as we go, but don't hesitate to use that Q&A to ask along the way if something comes up. So, like I said, I'm just going to spend 2 minutes on Augusta, okay? And the purpose is primarily because I do have a bunch of hard data that like basically is these are some facts to share, and I need you to know where they're coming from, so that way it is trustworthy to you, basically, because not all numbers are made the same, right? So. What Augusta does is we are an entirely home care specific company. We don't work with any other industries, or I like to joke, we don't do anything else with our lives, which is super true. The whole idea behind our software platform is that it's meant to help you recruit more easily, get higher quality hires, and ultimately help you hire in a really smart way, basically being as efficient as possible. The platform, what it does is it helps you find and interview the best possible caregivers who can actually help you grow your company. Not necessarily just any old person. They're specifically the type of people that you are going to be able to match with a client, which is why we call it the #1 caregiver applicant matching platform. Um, so that's where that name comes from. Okay, so basically what I'm going to move my little video, so hopefully it's not covering any of the words here. Okay. So The genesis of our product is basically that myself and my team, we've all been in senior care for a long time now, collectively, like more than 40 years, I think. Um, but so we already knew the main issue that most HR folks and recruiters in home care were facing was ghosting, basically. That you get a ton of applicants and so few people pick up the phone or when you call them, or no-show rates are quite high as well to interviews. So we already knew that that was going on. To try and figure out a solution to that problem, we started to look at everything from the caregiver's perspective. What are they actually going through today that is solvable with technology that's contributing to this experience. And the first thing was basically that applicants get bombarded with messages today. And that results in an environment where they don't apply thoughtfully to jobs. And I would argue there's probably other reasons that this is happening, but they are basically being enabled to keep applying, and it's incredibly easy, and it just creates this environment where they don't pay attention too much to what they're applying for. So by the time you call them, they don't remember applying to your company because they already one click applied on 16 others. So what Augusta's software does to fix this problem is it breaks the cycle of applicants not understanding what they're applying for by actually helping them understand what they apply for as they apply for it. So basically, we've completely transformed the way a caregiver learns about your company and applies to it all at the same time. And if anybody is interested in actually seeing what that looks like or how we make that happen, feel free to contact me after this. I'm happy to share a demo and do a consultation with you. But for today, I just wanted you to understand uh, that this is one of the main problems that our software solves, and it's also how we collect so much data on applicants. Because caregivers think our software is an application for the job. So we get them, part of our wheelhouse is getting almost every single applicant to answer more than 20 questions that are all home care specific about their background. And using all that data, we can see how many total applicants you have, how many people are getting hired at home care agencies, how long it's taking to get them to an interview. We have all this data from now it's almost 500,000 applicants who are just applying to home care jobs. So since we don't work with any other types of companies. So we've got this big old set of data where we can see now industry applicant to hire rates, industry time to hire, and excuse me, time to interview. So all this really critical data that literally tells you whether or not you're doing well, essentially. So that is the first thing to know about Augusta. And that kind of feeds into my next slide, which is basically that the other big component of what Augusta does is we help you understand why you're not hiring as much as you want to. The vast majority of companies that I see out there today are using a ton of different systems, and none of them, and they use a whole bunch of them together, spreadsheets and applicant tracking systems and this and that and the other thing. And all of it is in service of trying to figure out why you're not getting the hires that you want to. But that's what Augusta does, is we give you concrete, specific reasons why you're not hiring and help you compare that to industry average so that way you actually know, am I doing well? Um, so that's what Augusta does, and it's how we collect the information. Oh, this is just kind of a summary, basically. So, yeah, basically the software, as you can see in this picture on the left here, the caregiver thinks they're applying to the job, and in that workflow, we schedule them for an interview. And then on the management side, we are basically helping you identify the right people for your business. So we grade all your applicants so that way you know who are the best people and who are not worth your time. Through that process, our customers basically make better matches. And in fact, they're able to start matching applicants even before they have an interview based on the information we get you. Using our search tools, our customers are able to find very specific types of applicants that they need when urgent cases come in, and that is incredibly valuable. And then lastly, and mostly what we're going to be talking about today is your hiring funnel, basically. As I said, the critical things to measure, how to explain it, why talk to your boss about it proactively, all that good stuff. So if there's any questions at all about what Augusta does, feel free to put them in the chat. But that was my about Augusta section. So we're getting on to the good stuff now. Um, Okay. Oh, and that's my information. In case you do want to learn more about Augusta, feel free to reach out. The way I do this is basically I have a consultation with you to figure out if Augusta is the right fit for you. I'm going to go into it assuming nothing, basically. So it's a real conversation. And sometimes I may say, you know what, we're not going to be able to help you with that. And sometimes I say, you know what, we can help you with that. But if you want to find out, definitely give me a call, or email, schedule a call, whatever you prefer. Okay. So what is managing up? Managing up means proactively, I think that's kind of my emphasis there, proactively working with your boss by understanding what their priorities are, their communication style, and expectations. So all of this idea is basically about how you can align your work with what they are thinking about, basically. And doing it proactively changes the conversation like crazy with your boss. I've got some examples I'm going to share, but basically, it's the difference between your boss having to come to you and ask, why did this happen? Or why did we only have one person in orientation versus you going to your boss and saying, our applicant to hire rate is really low for the industry. Here's some things I think we can do to change that. It's a very different conversation. It'll literally make your boss ask you different questions, right? So that's what managing up is. Any questions, thoughts, comments? Feel free to put them in the Q&A. Cool. Hopefully that one's pretty self-explanatory. And I gave away a couple of things. I didn't mean to, but I got ahead of myself and excited. Okay, so in the Q&A, if you wouldn't mind, I would love to hear from you guys. What are some of the reasons why you think it would be helpful to proactively explain your hiring funnel to either the owner of the agency, your leader, whoever is your supervisor? Go ahead. I'll give you 2 minutes. Anything. There's no wrong answers here. So put anything that comes to mind, why it would be important to tell your boss about this and get ahead of it. Okay, so one person is saying, so you're both on the same page, if you will, and everyone understands the best way to go get more interviews, candidates, and work towards the same goal. I think that is a perfect answer. Danielle, thank you. I love this. I love this answer. You look better when you know stuff. Um, Perfect. I love it. Other ideas? Removes predetermined ideas and adds clarification to everything. Yes, yes. I think what you're alluding, this person, Joan, is kind of alluding to is that it's more data driven to bring your hiring funnel to your leadership rather than kind of like predetermined ideas that they might have, which love that. Erica says, coming to your boss with a solution rather than coming to you with a problem. Hi, Erica. Leslie says, you want your boss to know that you're engaged and working on it. Love it. Love it. Yes. Yes to all of it. You guys are incredible. And guess what? I put like almost the exact same stuff. Thank you so much for your answers. So Here's the way I said what you all are saying, basically. The first thing, and most importantly, I think, is that it does stop your boss from asking you the questions that you are probably frustrated with getting, which is, why are there only X number of people in interviews or orientation this week? And what do we need to do to hire more? So those questions, like if you keep getting those, that is very frustrating, and being proactive and sharing data is a really strong way to approach that problem. And honestly, probably it's going to change your job at the end of the day, if you do it consistently. Um, I think somebody said this, your boss knows what you're doing and why you're doing it, right? So they don't have to guess like, I haven't seen so and so I haven't seen Susan all day long. Where had she been? Or something like that, like you want to make sure your boss knows what you're doing with your time. It will make them very confident about you as a performer on the team. And Joan mentioned this a bit, which is my favorite. I mean, they're all perfect. I love every response that you guys gave, but hiring caregiver. Okay, I'm gonna back up for a second. The way I said this is hiring caregivers is math because data cuts through the noise. What I mean by this is that we all know home care is a very, very personal business. Like, and the work that HR folks and recruiters do every day, there is a significant amount of skill and finesse and almost a bit of an art that goes into performing a really good interview with a candidate. And there's things that you are only able to basically understand about somebody when you actually talk with them and have a real conversation and ask them questions, right? Um, so there is this part of the business that's incredibly personal. And it's why we need people doing interviews and evaluating candidates human to human. And at the same time, most business owners today um, know that at the end of the day, it is a business, right? It's all quantifiable. And so most people out there, when you approach them with data, it cuts out opinions, right? Everybody has predetermined ideas and can preconceived notions about what is happening and why it's happening. But if you can come to the equation with data and say, listen, this is our hiring funnel, this is our applicant to hire rate, that is a totally different conversation than are you than your boss wondering, is she doing the best she can? You know? Is there, you know what I mean? Like that's a really different way of talking about the problem. And what it does is my last point here. It changes the whole conversation from this being these questions being related to your individual performance and you being on the defense, to changing the conversation to you're looking for company solutions. This isn't a you problem. This is an us problem, right? And we can talk about how to solve it. And so it really does prompt your better conversations with your boss overall. They will, if you keep doing this proactively and consistently and follow through on the changes that you say that you want to make, um, it will change the conversation and they will ask you better things like, can you hire somebody to help you do this? Can you train somebody else to do what you're doing? And literally help you grow within your role. And hopefully, I mean, if that's what you want, if you would like to be a manager, if you'd like to move up in your organization, um, start to put you on that trajectory. They should also be asking you when you come to with it, the conversation with data, okay, we know that this is the situation right now. What do you need from me to make this result happen? Like that is a really different and way better question to answer than why aren't there more people in orientation this week? Um, so any other thoughts or questions about why proactively explain this stuff to your leadership? I think you guys have a pretty good handle on it from what you said. Okay, so I have so the next topic I'm going to talk about is what to measure in your hiring funnel. So I have a quick poll for you to ask what you think we should be measuring. So it should have just popped up on your screen. I have to admit, I'm a bit of a novice with webinar polls, but basically, if you look at that poll, just go ahead and indicate what are the most important areas you think that you should be measuring in the hiring funnel. And I listed a ton there. So pick as many as you think are the most important. Like, what are your top things? And then if there's an other, you can fill in another answer right there. So I'll give everybody just a couple minutes. Thank you for participating in the poll. I think we've got a decent number of responses here. I know I put a ton on that list because I was like, I'm just gonna keep writing and let people choose what they think is important. But I also wanted to quantify what we're doing, which is very much in line with the theme of today's session. Okay. All right. Give everybody like 30 more seconds on this, in case there's one or two more responses. Okay. All right. I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this poll here. Okay. All right. So I'm going to share these results with you. Hopefully you can see them now. Like I said, I'm a bit of a novice with the poll and how it shows up for you guys. But looks like we've got pretty even responses here. It looks like love this one. Okay, so 71% of people are saying total qualified applicants is one of the most important things to measure. Love that. Um, and then after that, looks like we've kind of got a tie on applicant to hire rate, scheduled interviews to completed interviews, total hires, and total disqualified applicants. So that is super, super helpful. And let's like wait a couple other responses too. How do I find those? Sorry. Looks like show up rates and will they show? Okay, so those are two more, I guess that's adding two more responses on the scheduled interviews to completed interviews. So that rate between that. So actually, surprisingly, I think it's a tie. The two highest that everybody thinks are the most important to measure are total qualified applicants and the number of scheduled interviews to the number of people who show up, basically, and you're actually able to complete an interview with. So that is really interesting. And I am going to share some data that may be new to you for some of those people out there, which hopefully will be helpful and maybe a little surprising. But if you totally disagree, I would love to hear from you and find out why, basically. But I do have some interesting information to share based on this one being kind of the winner and total qualified applicants. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing that and go into what Augusta has identified as the top 3 most important things to measure in your hiring funnel. And like I said, we may disagree, but I have some data that helps back up my points. So the first is applicant to hire rate. The reason that this is the most important when you're thinking about the conversation with your boss is because this is the math. It's the formula behind your hiring. So you may be exceptional at performing interviews. You may be able to build rapport with candidates and sell them really, really well. And to support that, there is a formula. There is a number of applicants that ultimately, on average, will produce a certain number of hires because it's literally how many shots at bat you have. So even when you're like excellent at those interviews and getting people from one stage to the next in your hiring process and you've got it all down pat, there is still a number of applicants that you need and ultimately a number of hires that you can get out of those applicants based on your process, based on the quality of the applicants, based on the amount of time that you have in the day. So that's why your applicant to hire rate is really one of the most important things that you can measure. Um, and like I said, feel free to put it in the Q&A or the chat or whatever you prefer to, or contact me afterwards if you totally disagree with this. I would love to hear more about why that is. The applicant to hire rate. Um, so I hopefully I explained clearly why it's important. It's because when you're talking to your boss about the idea of hiring caregivers being math at the end of the day, like there is a certain number of people that I'm able to do interviews with that I'm able to hire. You need to know if your current numbers are good or not, right? And the way to do that is to compare it to an industry average. So to my knowledge, I don't know if there's anybody else out there that is providing this stat. I haven't seen any other home care specific companies doing this, but Augusta has basically been able to demonstrate that the industry average is about 3.5%. And the best agencies with the most efficient hiring funnel are hiring, in some cases, up to 10% of their applicants. So I don't know if that's shocking to anybody out there, but it is average to hire only about 3.5% of all applicants who come your way. In a couple minutes, I'm going to ask you to calculate your own applicant to hire rate, so that way you know. But I'm going to come back to that. The next most important thing to measure in your hiring funnel is the biggest drop off in the hiring funnel. And this is going, I know, this is going to be very counter to what a lot of people said. So the biggest drop off in your entire hiring funnel is between somebody completing an application and whether or not they are qualified. And what I mean by the biggest drop off is the biggest drop off by volume, by sheerly number of applicants. Let's say you have 100 applicants total. If 50 are not even qualified for your business, that would be the biggest drop off, right? Or 70 are not even qualified for your business at all. Like they can't drive. They're not authorized to work in the US. Something that just is a total deal breaker that would mean that they're not working for your company at all. By volume, that is the biggest drop off in your hiring funnel. So if you can do something to change that section of your funnel, that's going to have ramifications down the rest of your funnel. By volume, the amount of people who scheduled interviews to complete interviews, there is a drop off there, but it is not the biggest. And I have example of hiring funnel so that way you can see exactly like real examples so you can see visually what I'm talking about. Okay, so I'm belaboring the point. Oh my gosh. Okay, so the last important thing to measure is time to interview. And again, so that way you can compare this to what you're doing right now. What we know from our big data set, almost 500,000 applicants through Augusta's software, we have seen that an applicant, if they have to wait more than 4 days to be able to schedule their interview, you are 100% less likely to hire them. So that is a huge cliff. And that's kind of something different, right? Like that than how many people there are or who they are, right? It's literally you have a maximum number of interview slots available in any given day. So that means that is the limiter, right? And then it also kind of includes what the quality of the applicant is at the same time. So that is the last most important thing to measure because of how big of a drop off it is. That is and again, it relates to the fact that by volume, the biggest drop off is at the top of your funnel, not between scheduled and completed interviews. I mean, obviously, that is extremely important because it's a lot of your time going into no shows, right? So that is it's I don't want to invalidate that that's an important stat. It's just not the most important because it doesn't affect the most people, basically. Um, okay, so feel free to chat if you have any questions or thoughts or comments about what we think are the most important things to measure. Okay, I'm going to just go over the math real quick. In case anybody feels kind of new to this and they're not sure how to calculate their applicant to hire rate, it's actually really pretty simple. It's basically just your total number of hires in a specific period of time divided by the total number of applicants that you had, and then you multiply it by 100, and that gives you the percentage. So this is a real customer of ours. I just blanked out their names, but it's a quite efficient hiring funnel in comparison to the industry average. If you remember, the industry average applicant to hire rate is about 3.5%. This agency, in this month anyways, they had a 6.5% applicant to hire rate. So any questions on how to measure your applicant to hire rate? And thank you, Danielle, for already calculating your applicant to hire rate. I was going to ask you guys to do that next. I love it. Okay, so it looks like there's no questions about how to measure or how to calculate it. It's just hires divided by applicants times 100, basically. Couple notes about this. It is best to average your applicant to hire rate over 6 months. I know that seems like a long time. It's helpful. It's certainly good to know month by month what's going on, right? If you see big fluctuations, something might have changed that you need to be aware of, right? But when you're thinking about how the business is doing overall, like big picture, like the type of conversation that you want to be having with your boss, it's best to look at it over 6 months. The two reasons for that are me, all of us have no control over the boom and bust cycles that happen with applicants. I'm going to talk more about that in a minute too. And if you're not familiar with the boom and bust, what I'm talking about is literally there are certain times of the year where there are more applicants in the market looking for jobs, and certain times of the year where there are fewer. So to have a normalized data set, it's really best to look at it over the course, like take this, if they do, they might do 5% one month, 6.5% the next month, average it over 6 months, basically. The second is that there are plenty of times when people take time off, right? You might go on vacation and you didn't do any interviews that week, and thus didn't hire anybody that week, you know? Yeah, it's another reason to average it. The last note that I put here is that your applicant to hire rate tells you very likely how much you need to advertise and how much you probably need to spend on advertising. This is actually a super, super important data point for knowing what to do next in terms of advertising. Because it should be pretty obvious if you do the math on your applicant to hire rate. If your applicant to hire rate is 2% and you change nothing about your process and you have a goal of hiring 10 people a month, that literally you can just backtrack, do the math. You need a certain number of applicants every single month to make those 10 hires happen. So that's why this is your formula and why it's going to inform how much you're doing advertising for caregiver jobs and probably what you're going to need to spend. Any questions, thoughts, comments? Put them in the Q&A. Okay. All right. So Danielle, thank you so much for being like way ahead of the game. But what I'd like you to do next, if you haven't already done the math in your head, is, and I know you may need to go dig through some data to find this, but if you could do a little bit of quick math and figure out what your applicant hire rate is and put it in the chat, that'd be awesome. Um, and as I said, that is going to specifically tell you how to meet your hiring goals, even if you change nothing about your process, which could affect how efficient you are. Um, Even if you just accept your hiring rate, whatever it is, then it does tell you what you're going to need to do in advertising, which I'm not going to be able to spend a lot of time on this today because I'm already taking like way too long. Um, but there is a report that Indeed.com does that is totally free and tells you exactly what your market level data is. And I had the last one I had pulled up here is a really good example just to look at. Like I said, I can't spend too much time on this, but this is a perfect example of the boom and bust cycles that you have zero control over, but it does tell you probably some of the things that you need to do in terms of advertising to be able to control for that as much as possible. So you can see here at the end, this service area, this report is showing you a specific job title that's being advertised on Indeed in a specific location, and then how many job seekers per job post there are for that job title. So it is incredibly helpful if you spend a little time studying this. You can see exactly what I mean about the boom and bust here. At the end of December, there was only 13 job seekers looking for caregiver jobs per job post. At the end of January, there's 47 job seekers looking for caregiver jobs per caregiver job post. That's a huge difference, right? That's almost, what was that, 4 times the number of people looking for jobs, which even if you're not doing an advertising at all, that is going to dramatically affect your results, right? 4 times the number of applicants just being in the market and you had nothing to do with it, right? So anyways, that's why it's super important to know a little bit more about your market so that way you know your applicant hire rate is going to tell you what you need to do in terms of advertising. And then this type of data is going to be able to tell you more specifically, like how many people are even out there that I can get to see my job posting, and what times of year am I going to have to spend more and spend less to make that happen. So super helpful. The link is in this slide deck, and obviously this is recorded, so I'll send it out later. Okay, so did anybody else calculate your applicant to hire rate? If you did, throw it in there. I would love to see a couple other people. Okay, all right. Looks like we got a couple other people responding. Joan, I'm not seeing your full answer, but when I see it pop up, I'll come back to it. Okay. So for the sake of time, I'm going to move on to the next biggest thing that you need to be measuring in your hiring funnel, which again, this is kind of one that people talked about. People talked about their total qualified applicants. That was the number 2 winner in the list of most important things. But I agree, total qualified applicants is extremely important. It is one of the 5 most important stages in your funnel. Out of that whole applicant to hire rate, it's definitely one of the most important stages. The way I talk about it, though, is disqualified applicants as being the biggest bottleneck rather than qualified applicants. And the reason I say that is because like I said, the report that you're seeing right here, this is from our product, but this is certainly something that you can do yourself without Augusta, just tallying up all your different, applicants and whether or not they were qualified, booked an interview, scheduled an interview, et cetera. What you can see here, just visually looking at the graph, is that the point between total applicants And sheer number of people who are disqualified is where the majority of people leave the funnel. And it may be in some cases that there's nothing you can do about it. Like you can't hire somebody who's not authorized to work in the US. So yes, they are disqualified and there's nothing, no, we're not going to do anything about it, right? But there are probably other reasons why people are being disqualified. So that's why it's so important to look at the literal by volume, by numbers, not by percentages, but by sheer and absolute numbers. What are the biggest drop-off points? There is definitely a big drop-off point between booked interview and completed interview. That's the case for most people out there in the home care industry, but it's not nearly as big as the number of people who are just disqualified. Because if you, like I said before, if you just think about that for a second, if you change some of the reasons why somebody is disqualified or qualified, or change your strategy around finding more of the qualified people because you know why they're being disqualified, that's going to change your results dramatically. It doesn't matter if you change your show up rate. I mean, it would be great if you change your show up rate, but it would matter a whole lot less than if you could figure out why these people are disqualified and what I need to do next about it, right? So I'm giving the example here of like, okay, so I've got 458 people who are disqualified. Why? Let's say, for example, that the main reason why is because at least 30% of those 450 people, so it's like 133 people, were disqualified because they live more than 50 miles away from your territory, your service area, wherever you do business. That is a really specific problem that it has potential solutions as compared to I was only able to get X number of interviews because those are the people who responded to me or whatever. Without, if you don't know why they've been disqualified, then it's a lot less meaningful and obviously a lot harder to explain to your boss, right? So that's why it's so important to look at those disqualified applicants because what you can do with this information in this example is there are things that you can try to do differently. On your ads, you can specifically state towns. You can make sure your location settings are all correct on whatever job board you're using to attract the right location applicants. You can look at doing hyper local advertising, right? Spend less on job boards and go to more job fairs that are in person. Put up more flyers in laundromats and churches and community centers. Like there are things that you can do differently that are very specific and will target that problem rather than just like, kind of shooting the dark, right? About why you're not hiring as much as you want to. So hopefully that makes sense about why this is your biggest bottleneck in your funnel and why it's so important to look at. Thank you so much, Joan, for your responses. So I'm just going to do some quick math on what you sent right there. Joan in the chat is saying that last week, it looks like, they hired one person out of 48 applicants, and that is a 2% applicant hire rate. So I'd be really curious to hear what it is over the course of like of 6 months, like I mentioned. But 2% really, I mean, compared to the national average of 3.5%, it's not really that bad. I mean, could be better, but even knowing that in and of itself, you kind of know how many more applicants you need to get with your current process as it is, right? Like you can do the math on that. So that's really helpful. Thanks so much for sharing that. Okay, so we are almost out of time here, and there's this one other important um, metric that I wanted to talk about, which is time to interview. So I'm going to try and go through it faster and talk less. So if you wouldn't mind, if you're still hanging in there with us on this, and could you go ahead and put in the Q&A, what do you think that you should be considering about time to hire? So what I had already said is that you know now that you are 100% less likely to hire someone if, excuse me, sorry, 100% more likely to hire someone if you can interview them within 4 days of their application. So what do you think that means that you should consider? Like, what are the considerations that what comes to mind when you know this stat? Like anything at all. There's no wrong answers here. Just throw it in the Q&A. Anything at all. You're 100% more likely to hire somebody if you can interview them within 4 days of their application. We're talking about the amount of time you have in the day. Keep schedules open. Thank you so much, Joan. She says, keep schedules open and have a backup person for your HR director because of no-shows and double book. Love those considerations. Any other ideas, thoughts that come to mind about time to interview? Okay, I'm going to keep going and make my last couple points, and then we're going to wrap things up with a couple recommendations on how to explain this to your boss. Okay, so time to interview. It involves two main ideas. Time efficiency, which Joan mentioned about keeping your schedule open. Time management and efficiency. You literally have a limited number of interview slots in any given day. And even though my company, we help improve your no-show rate usually, no-shows are still inevitable. There's some stuff that no technology in the world is going to be able to solve, at least today. Anyways, I still tell everybody no-shows happen. And at the same time, you have a limited number of slots. So that means that there is a definitive maximum possible number of interviews that you are able to possibly do in a month. So that is a very quantifiable number. There, like over the course of the month, let's say, I put in an example here just for visual people. Let's say you have 10 interview slots in a day and your show up rate is 60%. You can do the math on exactly how many interviews you are going to be able to do in any given month, which is limiting the number of hires that you're able to do in any given month. There's all sorts of other factors, right? But we're just talking about breaking this down to math so that way you can explain it to your boss, right? Of like literally how much time you have in a day, and how, like what that equates to in terms of possible hires. The next thing is the process that goes into getting somebody from an application to an interview within 4 days and doing that consistently. And one thing I hear a lot of recruiters say is, I'm super fast. I call everybody same day. I call everybody within the hour. Being fast yourself at the work that you're doing to contact applicants isn't necessarily the same as having a fast process. And I'm sure everybody out there is doing their best possible job to be quick, because a lot of people know that speed to hire is important for caregivers. But what I would also add for you to think about is, how many steps does it actually take for an applicant to connect with you or you to connect with the applicant? That is an efficiency aspect, which has nothing, doesn't, I mean, is separate from how fast you are at doing your job, right? Like literally the number of steps in the way changes how fast things can possibly happen. Let's say, for example, you have somebody applies on Indeed, and then you email them a second application because you didn't get the information you wanted the first time. Basically, like you need more information to evaluate the candidate. You are literally putting another step in front of the applicant that is going to slow down your ability to get everybody interviewed within 4 days of their application, right? So, because they think that their application was on Indeed, right? They one-click applied on the job, they applied. That's what I mean by you being fast is different than your process being fast. So that's something very important to consider. Literally, how many steps is it? How long is your interview? So whatever your first interview with with an applicant is, a lot of people do either phone interview or a Zoom interview as their first interview with the applicant. If it's 20 minutes versus an hour, that makes a huge difference in terms of how many interview slots you have available, right? So that is also going to limit how quickly you can get those interviews done within those 4 days. And then finally, what type of interview is it? A phone interview versus an in-person interview has major time implications for you and the applicant. The applicant may need, if they have to drive 45 minutes to come into your office, that's going to literally slow down how fast they can get to you. Like versus phone interview or a Zoom interview would be a whole lot faster. So um, for the sake of time, I'm going to skip that other slide. And hopefully if there's any questions on why time to interview is so important and some of the steps that you need to think about to make that faster and literally make sure that you're interviewing everybody within 4 days or getting them on the interview calendar within 4 days of their application, just let me know. Feel free to reach out to me after this. Okay, so the last thing I wanted to leave you with today is how to explain this to your boss in a way that sets realistic expectations for you both. So we already talked about why it's important, and the central idea here is come to your boss with numbers and suggestions. That if you take nothing else away from this, you will get so much further in the conversation with them if you can say, I put literal examples. And your agency may have different problems, right? So I'm trying to cover these three main areas, but like you may have all different things going on in your business, but there is some way to quantify your problems. I guarantee you, it may not be perfect, but there is a way to quantify your problems, and that is a very different conversation. So for example, you can say to your boss, I ran the numbers and our 6-month applicant to hire rate is 4.5%. That is better than the industry average of 3.5%, but I still think we can improve it. I have some ideas. And then those specific things that make sense based on whatever the ideas you have are. If you want to, so part of what I talked about at the beginning about managing up is knowing what your boss's priorities are. So assuming that you know what your boss's goals are financially, like for the business, they want to grow this much by the end of the year. You can come to them and say, if you want to grow 10%, if you want to grow our billable hours 10% every single month, I can tell you because of our applicant to hire rate, which is 4.5%, that I need this many applicants to make that happen. And that means that we need to spend more on advertising. Let me walk you through the numbers. Like, wow, way different conversation with your boss than, hey, I think we might need to spend more on ads, right? If you come to them with specific numbers and say, I can do this for you if you give me this, that's like, whew, their mind is going to be blown. Okay, next on the biggest bottleneck, this is the way I would say it to my boss and why we need to try other advertising avenues is in this the example I gave about disqualified applicants. You can say, I had 400 applicants this month, and the biggest bottleneck is finding more people who are qualified at a base level, even qualified enough to do an interview, because I know that most disqualified applicants live too far away from us. It was, 100 out of 400 people live just sheerly too far away. So that's why I recommend that we go to 2 job fairs this month. That's really, really persuasive, right? It's much more persuasive than, do you think we should try job fairs? It might, might help us. Really specific. And then lastly, what I was just talking about with the time to interview. This is a way to quantify it and talk to your boss about it. I have X interview slots per day. And I'm granted, you may have other things in your job role. You might also do orientation and training. So there may be like only 4 days a week that you're able to do interviews. I'm not sure what your schedule is, right? But you should know, you should be able to say, okay, because we have 30-minute interview slots, I have this many slots available every single day. Most of them are already filled. Our show up rate is 60%, and we're booking 4 to 5 days out. We know that we're 100% less likely to hire somebody who has to book on that 5th day. So I suggest that we change the steps in our process, or shorten our interviews, or streamline the way the interviews are performed rather than in person, do them on the phone at first. Um, there's a lot of different potential suggestions that you can make, but it starts with just laying it out super clearly. This is how much I'm limited by. This is what's happening now. Here's the ways we can fix it. Okay, so I went overtime, guys, but that was everything I pretty much wanted to share today. I probably could keep talking. If there's any other questions, I'll stick around for a couple more minutes. Feel free to throw them in the Q&A, or just reach out to me. If you want to talk more about your process and try and figure out some of the reasons why you're not hiring as much as you want to, and have some data to back up the conversation you want to have with your boss, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to do a free consultation with you. And I can also share more about Augusta too, if it makes sense. So yeah, I think that's everything. I'm just going to leave my contact info up on the screen here and hang out in the chat in case anybody has any other questions. But thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it. I hope you got something out of this. And I hope I get to talk with you soon. Thanks, everybody.